Hey everybody, it's James Lindsay, and you're listening to the new Discourses Podcast, and it's time, I think, for me to say a few things about my friend Charlie Kirk. On the night that Charlie was murdered, September 10th, I, sitting in shock, got on my X account and I wrote something. I recently had some family come into town, and my aunt was talking with me, and she had somehow stumbled across this that I had written, and she's just taken by it. She's a boomer, so she printed it out and handed it out to her friends who don't so much use the internet, and she sent it around, and she says it's, in her opinion, a message everybody in America should hear. And so I'll start talking about Charlie here by reading it, actually, kind of to respect the wishes of my aunt, who is so taken by this. It started this way. I've been trying to share a particular message for a couple of years now, and I can never quite find the words. I doubt I will tonight, but I have to try again because I watched my great friend get murdered over it today. We have a choice: catharsis or civilization. There is no other choice for us. We can have a civilization where people are civilized enough to live, work, and trade with one another in a productive way, a safe way, a trustworthy enough way, or we can abandon it for the pursuit of letting the negative emotions of the past years, decades, or even... I said it wrong, of course. Let me try that again. Or we can abandon it for the pursuit of letting the negative emotions of the past years, decade, or decades consume us. There is no other choice. If we choose catharsis, we let our emotions, our pathos, get the better of us. We turn to our anger and look to give it more justifications. We turn to our frustration and seek an orgiastic release through whatever deeds vent it. We turn to our oppression, our rage, our despair, our fear, and we let it flow through us until the pathos pours out and covers the land and what will eventually be fire and blood. Catharsis is tempting, and stepping into it will be libidinous, orgiastic, elevating, and divine, until we realize that it's the feast of demons upon everything we could have built and everything we could have passed on to our children and to our posterity. Civilization is harder. It's bitter, in fact, in comparison to catharsis. It means swallowing hard and taking all those negative emotions and sublimating them into something productive, something that builds rather than something that makes us feel better. Civilization feels like injustice, in fact, even though it is the only basis for justice outside of heaven and hell, if they exist. If we choose civilization, we're allowed to be mad, but we must temper our anger into right action that builds something to leave a better world, which will dissolve it, of course. We're also allowed to be frustrated, but we must sublimate our frustration into the dedicated search for real and lasting solutions to our problems in a civilization worth living in and passing on to our children. We are not allowed to despair, though, and we cannot persist in fear. We must have faith that swallowing and metabolizing all of our negativity to turn it into a flourishing society is possible and worth it. And faith will drive out fear and is the mortal enemy of despair. Civilization is not available on the wide path. It is the narrow path, at least so far as worldly life goes. Veer too far to one side or the other, or even for too long a moment forget your purpose or principles, and you lose the path, lose civilization, and lose everything worth having. Without civilization, though, we will find ourselves in a terror beyond our comprehension. Maybe it will be like the philosopher Thomas Hobbes described it in the wake of the terrible English Civil War, when civilization was nearly thrown aside. Violent, solitary or tribal, nasty, brutish, short. A wicked and selfish war of all against all. It looks like the favelas of Brazil. Maybe we'll end up conquered, fighting amongst ourselves while our enemies feast on our folly. Maybe we'll end up holding it together for a little while anyway, under a tyrant who can, for a time, make it all stop and demand order. Maybe we'll all just end up learning Mandarin and get along mustering the ins and outs of social credit existence. Civilization is worth fighting for, and catharsis is the kind of momentary pleasure followed by pain that every virtue stands in opposition to. In a civilization, we, and each of our children after us, can live as individuals, free to pursue our dreams in sufficient safety and opportunity to generate abundance. Catharsis will be a groupish disaster with all the allure and hangover of a drunken mosh pit. Again, I'm not expressing myself the way I see this issue in my mind. It's such an important message that I just can't get right, no matter how I try. What I will say is that for any differences in the particulars my great friend Charlie Kirk and I have had, Charlie Kirk stood for, lived for, and acted to his dying breath for civilization. He was far too temperate and wise, even at 31, to give in to catharsis. How can I be sure? Under strange circumstances once, I found myself out on a skiing boat on a lake with Charlie Kirk. Music was playing. We were having a good time, enjoying the morning. Charlie, with his standard grin, bare chest in the sun, laughed a little and explained himself. I had fun once, guys, and I hated it. Then he made our host change the music from something fun and hip to classical. And we ran up and down the lake alongside all the other party boats, listening to Bach, Vivaldi, and Stravinsky, not having fun even once and loving it. Charlie Kirk lived for civilization, and nothing remotely like catharsis would have been near his mind, heart, or soul, even in its darkest, most frustrated moments. Charlie wanted to win, but he wanted to win so that we can move away from evil and move away from cathartic, orgiastic destruction and toward civilizational order where his family and children could grow up as strong, proud Americans. More than that, Charlie lived for Jesus, the Logos, as he is named in John 1. He knew the difference between the Logos and the Pathos. Human though he was, he understood civilization is built on the rock of Logos, and that it can never be built on the churning sands of Pathos. That's how I know that Charlie Kirk understood the choice I still cannot articulate. We have two options, and only two. They are catharsis and civilization. Charlie Kirk lived that we would have civilization. May Charlie Kirk not have died such that we spiral into catharsis and evil. So, Backstage Pass, that was harder to read than it was to write at the time. Thanks for bearing with me. So as you heard, Charlie was a very special man. As you all know, Charlie was a very special man. He was impossible. I mean, the man was impossible. I talked to him, I don't know how many times. Charlie, I don't know how you do everything you do, short of maybe the President of the United States. I can't think of a person who's busier than you are, who works harder than you do, who gets more accomplished with your time than you do. And how do you do it? And he said that he takes everything very seriously. He takes his sleep very seriously. He takes his diet very seriously. He manages his time. In fact, Charlie managed his time so rigorously that it was occasionally unsettling. Never that he was impolite, but if the schedule ran up, if anybody who's dealt with him knows this, if he's got somewhere else to be, or it's time for the next thing, he more or less would say, good to see you, spin on his heel and leave. There's no kind of winding down. It just took off. And it's, disorienting at first when you encounter that. But it also just fit. It's who he was. It's how he was. But you hear this intense focus on taking care of himself to make sure that he was in the best position that he could be to do the work that he wanted to do. And that he did at a level that is frankly unmatched. I've seen, a lot of the tributes that have come out since, and the old tweets, the old messages, and the one from Tom Woods, who everybody now knows I don't really get along with, where Charlie had emailed him maybe back in 2012 and said that, very proud, like saying that he hoped one day to be able to meet Tom Woods, this libertarian, and said, I've read both of your books and watched all of your videos. And normally, he's like, I'm 17 and I want to do this, or 18 at the time, I don't know, and I want to do this. And I started this Turning Point USA, but I've read both of your books and watched all of your videos, and nobody doubts that that's actually what happened, because that's how hard he worked. That's how interested he was. That's how engaged he was. That's why he was so capable with everything that he did. It's why he could debate like he did on those college campuses, besides his inordinate talent for absorbing and retaining and regurgitating and articulating information very well. Constantly seeking and constantly pushing, and it's really an inspiration we should all be thinking about. Having a relationship with Charlie was an interesting thing. We're always ending up having to do something. It was always work-oriented. It was always quick. We did hang out like for fun three times, more than three, but there was always something that it was built around. That's probably because of the nature of our relationship, the fact that we lived across the country from one another and so on. But he's always challenging his friends. He was always challenging everybody. It's not just these young people on college campuses or some of the older weirdos who would show up. He would always challenge people. What are you reading? What are you learning? What book is in front of you right now? And for me, Charlie was always, of course, very interested. And he always pushed me every single time I saw him. What have you been reading in the Bible? It was always what Bible verses, Bible stories, Bible chapter, Bible something have you been reading? And at first it was disorienting, and he was softer at first. It wasn't what are you reading? It was what are your favorite Bible verses? And he expected you to have an answer. And if you didn't have an answer, how would that be? I don't know what would happen, but you had to have an answer. And so we ended up having these great conversations. We had a very long conversation once on a flight about the parable of the talents, and how crucial and important it is, and how central it is to the mission that he and I both have with inspiring young people to build their joy through hard work, that the true joys in life come from building along the lines of an investment. It doesn't matter which domain, and that the parable of the talents provided in the gospel is basically one of the best sources to understand how to do that. So we talked about the parable of the talents. We had many discussions, as it turns out. I think he was studying the book of Numbers at one point in this, and we had many discussions about the relevance of the book of Numbers and the challenge presented in the book of Numbers, or actually Exodus through Numbers, about the long suffering of people, and what happens when you start complaining and lose faith, and how that displeases God, and how your end of the covenant is to keep faith and not to complain and not to desire bondage, even though it's more comfortable, or at least in certain ways more comfortable. So we had long conversations about that. We had conversations about his, I think, maybe favorite topic in the Bible. I'm not sure, but he was on a real kick about Genesis 1 through 11 and how it's the fundamental basis for effectively everything. I mean, it is the first 11 books of the Bible. And so we talked a bit about that, but it was always, what are you reading? What are you thinking about? I had a nice conversation at one point about the reflections in Paul's letter to the Galatians about the balance of mercy and justice. And I always felt like I was kind of having to crib, right? It was like I was, because I knew he'd get me, looking in the Bible and reading some for myself. But primarily, I have this habit. I often have been invited to speak in churches. And when I do, if my schedule, my flight schedule and so on allows it, and I happen to be there during a time when there's a service, usually Sunday morning, but occasionally it'll be, a Wednesday evening or whatever, and I get invited to go to the service, I usually will. And so I'm like cribbing notes from these pastors, and then like I'm running into Charlie, and he's like, what you been reading in the Bible? And I'm like, Well, I was just at this church and I thought it was really interesting that the pastor was talking about, whatever it was, the book of Hebrews or whatever. And so then, we would talk about that. But the point is that he was always pushing me in that. And this is really something about him, is faith wasn't a performance. It wasn't an accessory. It was something that literally and fully informed and drove all of his activities, including his friendships. And, he really was a friend. It's an unlikely thing, looking back at it, even during the time. I never took this for granted. It's just always an unlikely thing that Charlie Kirk would be my friend. Of all people. We have, many things, obviously, that we agreed on and that we got along very well about. I actually did prefer the classical music to the hip-hop on the boat, frankly, but I also thought it was a little weird and could have gone for some, classic rock or something instead. But I digress. But we got along on a lot of things, but there were some pretty deep differences. The religious difference was one. He was always very meticulous, though, not to browbeat me about this, to ask me where I was and how I was going, and with my, they refer to it, or he referred to it, the faith journey. I don't really like that language, by the way, but I don't know if he actually used it, but I hear it a lot. So he's always talking to me about this, and convinces me absolutely that the word atheist does not apply and the word agnostic is correct. How did he get to this conclusion? By not out of some political decision or you're my friend, so I'll give you a pass, but because it was the honest reflection of my views based on how I answered questions and engaged in dialogue about the issues of faith that we were discussing. And so he pushed me into this position. He invited me to so many things. I always get this, I am a classical liberal. I was leaning left, but still in a classical liberal way. I was never in any particular way woke. I did get sucked in by some woke psyops, sort of, but very quickly started peeling that away as soon as I started to realize what it was. That's pretty famous, that I stood up against the third wave radical feminism very early. And, Charlie had me on as, this liberal who was dismantling critical race theory. And of course, he and I met because of the grievance studies affair, which he thought was just fantastic, that I had exposed the rot in the research academia. But it was an unlikely situation that we were friends, given, some differences, or maybe not, I don't know. But this is the point that I want to make, is this is who Charlie was, is that he was such a friend. He didn't give up on his friends. Obviously there are controversies right now that we're all seeing that are testament to the fact that he didn't even give up on his friends when they became real problems, real trouble. A lot of people know, for example, that, Charlie and I disagreed about this woke right stuff. He saw it as drama, if you want to know the story, that he didn't want to participate in. But we still texted as friends. Literally up until, I think the last time I texted him was the last week of August, so not that long before he was shot. So, we were still in communication. He had recently invited me to dinner so that we could sit down and talk. It would be a text out of the blue, I miss you, we need to hang. So he was friends with people, like truly friends, truly friends. But his friendship wasn't this kind of sappy, sentimental thing. It's like he actually, literally, his basis of friendship was that he cared about the people that he was working with. And this is extraordinarily rare for such a political figure, such a public figure, because there's such an opportunity for cynicism. There's such an opportunity for, cynical relationships that are transactional or instrumental or quid pro quo of some variety or another. And it was never that. It never was that. If there were disagreements, if there were issues, the friendship remained rock solid, and Charlie had a strong belief that either it could be hashed out or a mutual respectful detente could be achieved and held, or in some cases that he could help save people from what he thought was error. And that's unbelievably admirable, as a matter of fact. And it's a true testament to his character, and again, how his faith informed basically everything. And in that capacity, he did, by his very nature, the fact that he never stopped talking about it, but never in a weird, preachy way, and always remained friend first, but rooted in his belief, was the most effective form of evangelism that, I've ever encountered. It's not to say he was perfect or anything like this, but it's just truly admirable, and it's a weird situation and a blessing I never actually took for granted. I always thought it was just a little bit on the strange side that we were such fast and good friends. From the first time we met, we were very quickly friends. It's been a challenging week. I don't want to get into that actually, but because he was such a friend. But I thought about because it actually seems like it might have been some distant, dim possibility that I might be asked to speak on behalf of his memory, either directly for Turning Point at some point, or much more likely somewhere else. So I've had to think, what message? And all I've thought really is something biblical, of course, which is that this idea, this weird idea, if for people who are not Christian, it's weird. Okay, I'm sorry, Christians, we don't know what you mean. We're not saying it's strange or peculiar. It's strange phrasing, and we don't know what it means outside, which is to be salt and light. And Charlie truly exemplified that, right? So light isn't that hard. You're always to be shining a light, bringing truth, trying to help people. This is why he engaged on the campuses the way that he did, bringing light to the lost, bringing light to the people in the dark that he thought he was talking to, even when, some of them obviously, very obviously, hated his guts beyond comprehension. He understood that he had to love his enemies, if your persecutors is a better word than enemies here, and understood that that no one is actually lost, in the sense that they're irredeemable. You have to, constantly shine the light. But salt is the part that us outside of the faith have a harder time understanding. Like, why do you want to be salt? What does that mean? And, when you look at it in the scriptures, Jesus says that salt has a particular flavor, and you can tell its worth by if it still has its saltiness. And if it doesn't, then it's no better than dust, and to cast it down and trample it underfoot. So it's of no worth. But what does salt do? He explains that it has a preserving function. So you get these two elements of what it means to be salt, but also there's the allusion to being the salt of the earth, to being good, plain folk, to being the kind of people who help one another and are always ready to step in. But this preserving function is kind of never far away. And what are you preserving? You're preserving that which is good, and that which is true, and that which is beautiful in the society, in the community, in the family, in your own life. And so you have to live to this preserving function. And the way that he lived his life on any given issue, right or wrong, because he's a man, he had a pretty damn high batting average, but it went, each way sometimes. He's also a young man. We forget, because of his inordinate stature and capabilities. He was 31 years old. He did not even come close to growing into the fullness of his maturity of both life and body and whatever, but also mind and spirit. There was a lot more that was coming that would have been even more unbelievable. But he had that. His goal was to save America. It was supposed to be a turning point in America where we got off of the wrong path and came back toward the right path. And everything he spoke up about had that intention behind it. Again, right or wrong in the specific issue, but right far more often than wrong. And so there's that other quality, though, that I think a lot of people don't always get, which is the flavor of the saltiness. The salt can't lose its saltiness. And this is where I think Charlie really shined. Think about it. challenging people the way that he did. Think of those kids on college campuses. Think of standing on stages in front of thousands or sometimes tens of thousands, or gosh, maybe even hundreds of thousands. Sometimes I don't know what his reach was, all over the world, and deciding he's going to proclaim his gospel beliefs, that he's going to take a stand for social conservatism. And again, it doesn't matter whether you agree with social conservative views or not, or to what degree you do. He knew they were important. He knew that he saw the value in them, and he brought them to the fore with that flavor that's unmistakable. You couldn't hear it and not taste the saltiness, and not in the slang way that the young people mean about being upset or mad. I mean, in the sense that I'm trying to use words that aren't spicy or piquant, but it has this strong flavor. You know it when you taste salt. It's unmistakable. And so he did that everywhere, all the time, in private relationships, like I was relating about stories that I had with him, and in public, very much in public. Took firm stands, but never lost sight of decency and the dignity of the people he was speaking to. In fact, he usually spoke into their dignity, tried to elevate their inherent sense of dignity out of them, instead of watching them wallow in what would be the temptations of the world. And he called people to that higher order of being. In other words, civilization, according to how I started this, rather than catharsis or indulgence, which aren't quite the same thing, but they're related. And so he was salt and light. So, I think about it, and it's like, how much more than the vast majority of people that any of us in our lifetimes have experienced. There are some notable examples people might think of, depending on your faith, of people who are comparable in their capacity to have embodied that, even at such a young age, but not a lot, not many. And so he was not just that, but teaching a generation to be that. And so the message is, what about the vacuum that he leaves? And there is a vacuum. There's an incredible vacuum, and not just the practical power vacuum at Turning Point or in the MAGA or conservative movements or any of this nonsense that's of such secondary importance. There's the vacuum of what he represented and stood for that was the result, that brought the result of hundreds of millions of people streaming his memorial service in Arizona. Hundreds of thousands, many times the capacity of the stadium, that he had his memorial in, filled a stadium. But it didn't just fill the stadium. Something like 4 times as many people as would fit, or 5 or 3 or something, I don't know, showed up. And the reason is because he was who he was, and he brought so much salt and so much light to the world that people showed up to pay their respects for what he had represented and been and done. And they tuned in again by the hundreds of millions. And so we talk about, picking up the torch or the microphone, as the metaphor goes in this case. And what does that look like? Well, it's obvious to me that what he brought was so much salt and light that I don't know that there are any, maybe a few unrealized, who can step into that vacuum of salt and light that he left. Not all the way left. Obviously, people are watching his videos and discovering it for themselves. In some sense, there is that immortality of legacy there that won't easily go away. But that's, I think, the call, is to step into that embodiment. We have to figure out how to bring light to the world in a similar way. We have to pursue truth and friendship like that. We have to be willing to be the salt of the earth, but also the salt that preserves, and also the salt that doesn't lose its flavor as it goes to do what it does, which is speaking the truth and loving the truth and standing in courage. I remember at one point I was on stage. Actually, it wasn't planned that I was going to be on stage. I happened to be in the crowd at a Turning Point faith event, and it was known that I was in the crowd. Obviously, it wasn't a mystery, but they showed Eric Metaxas's film about Bonhoeffer, which I was also in, and I suddenly get this kind of tap on the shoulder about 10 minutes, 15 minutes from the end. It's not a very long film. I think it's an hour. I tap on the shoulder, James, come with me, come backstage. Charlie and Eric want you on stage with them for the discussion about this film. And I was like, okay. So I go up backstage. I missed the end of the film. I could, to this day, couldn't tell you how it ends. I never actually got around to seeing the end of it. I'm sure it's great. It's got to be a winner. I have no idea. I missed it completely. And so a few minutes later, 15, 20 minutes later, I don't know, whatever, there I am on stage with Charlie and Eric. And this is just how it always was. They were asking, talking this, talking that. And, I'm cribbing notes again from other people I've listened to. But I tell this audience, and there were thousands of people there, like 4,000. It was insane how many people I was sitting in front of, pastors and all this religious stuff. And I'm sitting there, and, I was like, I just want to say, it says that in the Bible, faith without works is dead. It is, grace by faith alone, but it's faith without works is dead. So you actually have to put that into practice. And that's what this film is about, is, that you have to put this into practice. And you actually have to take a stand. The idea of the Bonhoeffer message is, imagine if more pastors in the German church had been salt at that time against the rise of the Nazis. And I didn't say that part, but I said, you have to be willing to take a stand. And the piece that's missing, the bridge between faith and works, is courage, because courage is proof of faith, because it means that you believe in something bigger than yourself that's worth taking a risk to do. And so courage is proof of faith. And of course, proving faith would please God and make, if it is that you can make yourself more worthy of a miracle, where miraculous intervention is necessary, certainly the message is that your sacrifice has to be real and all of this. And I have this whole message about this, but the bridge between faith and works is courage, which of course Charlie exemplified. And of course Charlie just got his goofy smile and said to Eric something like, isn't he great? Or whatever. And Eric, in his signature way, if you don't know Eric Metaxas, you should look up Eric Metaxas. He's his signature way. He's a character. He can't help but roast everybody all the time. I remember one of the Turning Point Faith Pastor Summits, Eric Metaxas comes out for the opening remarks after Charlie introduces everything and claims that Charlie's his illegitimate son in front of this whole room of pastors, and just everybody's in shock and laughing and doesn't know what to do. Eric is just this unbelievable character, this unbelievable wit. And so Eric says that he tells Charlie and 4,000 people or whatever were there that he believes that I have already converted and just won't admit it, even to myself. And that's too much to be true, but it's just, testament and character to what Charlie's way was about, what he wanted to bring out in people, why he never gave up on friendships, why he could be such a true friend, and why it's up to all of us now to whether it's a microphone or whatever else. Probably we shouldn't pick up literal torches. That's probably a bad idea, not in line with his ideas. But the metaphor is to pick up the torch and carry it. It's more like the Olympic torch, right? This is why bringing this salt and light, I think, is the thing. And we have a lot of it to find and a lot of it to spread. And I can't help but think that that's among the best ways that we could honor Charlie. And it is, in terms of the way that I started with that little reading of what I wrote. I think the way that we choose civilization instead of giving into our anger and our grief and our frustration and fear, I think it's how we overcome those and step into this as a space of opportunity to make this, it's so freaking cheesy to call it the turning point for America, or Turning Point USA, actually, but I think that this is the way that we do that. So look for that for yourself. Look how you can exemplify truth and beauty and goodness in the world, and to build something, and to invest, and to choose the classical music over the hip hop, even if you're out on the lake trying to have a good time, because you might have fun once and you might hate it. I don't know, but I guess that's what I have to say. I'm gonna miss my friend.